So standing comfortably, just giving yourself a chance to settle in as always. Feet hip width apart and weight slightly forwards in your feet. Just turning gently. It's better. A couple of nice, slow, gentle breaths. Let your hips drop back. With a feeling that your pelvis is just hanging downwards. Like it's hanging from a piece of string, like a bucket hanging from a rope in a well. And that'll have the effect of giving you a slight pull on your lower back and encouraging this softening in your knees so that there's a very slight curve in your knees. It just allows for this freer movement in the upper body, particularly around your hips and your waist and up into your shoulders.
Your phone.
One's charging. Yeah.
As you settle into the movement, just trying to feel that the turning in your hips sort of begins a process of movement up through your back. Certain muscles just expanding and contracting. And see if you can feel that working right up through to your shoulder blades and your shoulders. Also in the front of your body, particularly your rib cage. But the front of your body should also have this slight feeling of hanging and being supported by your back. Remember that as mammals, we're essentially quadrupeds trying to stand on two legs. So most of our anatomy is orientated towards being horizontal rather than vertical. So the problem is always, how do we get to the vertical without twisting, without straining? And this is where the spin of your hips sinking back is so important. And then just raising your arms. And let your hands drop. Give you a few moments just to stand and appreciate this posture. And as you stand there, you'll probably find, suddenly realize the shoulders tight or a bit of your back's tight or whatever. If you focus your attention on that area with the idea of releasing them, they will relax a little bit, but then somewhere else will tighten up. It takes a while, but the overall feeling should be of the tension, the tightness draining down away through your legs. Leaving behind this stronger, denser quality in your legs and up through the middle of your body. So just letting your hips drop down a little bit more. Bring your hands around as though you're cradling the ball and push. Just letting yourself settle into the familiar routine. Not so that you can sort of just drift off mentally, so that you can just follow the patterns in a familiar sense, like walking through a wood or over a field that you walk through many times, and just noticing the changes. Subtle movements. Every now and then, you'll probably notice something more that you haven't encountered before or haven't registered before. Body expanding, contracting, and with the contraction, a stronger sense of this dropping of your weight. Now let your hands drop down a little bit further, moving into the wild goose. One more time. And then heart in the cloud. It's me. Nice, smooth, massaging quality in the movement. And now change. Dragon plucks the stars from the sky. Remember, it's not a stretch. You've got this little bend in your elbow at the end of the movement. So looking to go to 80% of the full movement. What that should do is help us to understand where the boundary, if you like, between hard and soft exist as we extend that outwards. The further your hand gets from your body, either upwards or downwards, the more likely you are to experience that stiffening, that tightening. Once we started to recognize the signs that that boundary is approaching, that's where we learn to just release a little bit. That's where habitually we tend to strain. But if, for instance, you move your arm up and you meet that little bit of stiffness, that tightness here, then you could draw back, which is, of course, what I'm talking about doing. But that in itself will sort of ease the tension, ease the tightness, and give you more movement. But every now and then, what you might want to do is get to there and think, well, can I let the shoulder drop a little bit more? Can I let the whole of the body open a little bit more? And sometimes you will get more movement that way as well. So that soft boundary, as I've described it before, gradually extends. It's a bit like blowing into a bubble. You've got to be very careful how hard you blow, otherwise you'll burst the bubble. So there's quite a lot of trial and error involved in this. One more time, because we have to have a sense of how we're doing today. It's not always going to be a constant. It's not going to be the same every day. And then hands to your hips and pushing up. That's why the initial sort of checking in process is so very important, to have a sense of how we're doing at this point. We're not machines that we can program to perform in exactly the same way each day. There's any number of elements that will affect us, both mentally and physically, internally and externally. There's no reason to suppose that our performance should be at peak for the whole time. Quite an unfair expectation if you think about it. Remember, weight slightly forwards, hips dropping back. That sense of your hips and pelvis, buttocks overhanging. Aware of the resilience, the springiness in your legs, your lower back, continuing to support you. Just allowing your body to find its sense of equilibrium between downward movement and the upward movement. One more round. The hands drop down to your sides and check. Again, expansion. Again, trying to make sure that your shoulder doesn't sort of push up towards your ear. Sometimes you just place a hand there. Sometimes you'll feel a sort of twitch in the muscles as it's trying to stiffen up. It's quite hard to get rid of in my experience. So eventually we find ways to make these movements without reintroducing those tight or slightly twitchy feelings. Change the other side. Now go back to the first side. Now you've done two sides. See what it's like to turn. Sometimes it's better to do each side without the turn because both sides need to sort of loosen up a little bit to turn. Sometimes I do them, well, normally I would do them one after the other, but let's try a slightly different way. In your own practice, you can choose which way suits you best. and then change sides again. When you swing your hand out, try and just press out a little bit. I've sometimes described this as though you're standing beneath the archway of a door, just wanting to slide your hand around that. So there's a feeling of contact in the palm of your hand. And then rowing a boat in the middle of the lake. Once again, feeling the significance of your hips dropping back. And that serves to draw your shoulders up. Imagine like pulley cords from your hips to your shoulders, so that you would have to do something quite extraordinary to stop your shoulders coming up high, because everything else will follow on. One more time. So with that last exercise, if we can imagine, I've sometimes said, as though there were a pole going up to our body, which there isn't really. But if you think of this as the center line of your body, the spine would be there, various muscles and tendons. So there is something there. There is a sort of construction there, although it's not one solid thing. So the idea is, if this is the tail of your spine, and this is where your head would be. In rowing a boat, what we do is we try and sort of encourage this. It's a short lever, but it is a lever nevertheless. And so the movement upwards there is really quite smooth. And I've probably said this before to all of you at one time or another, but for me, this is one of the most significant things in Tai Chi, that actually we use the pull of gravity to help us come upright. And if you think about it, that's quite remarkable. It's quite a remarkable change to the sort of attitude that we unconsciously carry, that we're constantly straining. And so rather than a sort of stiff, tight feeling in the upper body, the muscle tone is quite strong but elastic. And sort of like trying to get away from this image of plank-like muscles or something like that, because muscles that are like that aren't able to move and will kind of tighten in the space. And we want the movement. We want the movement to be able to do the exercises. We want the movement to be able to breathe, to let the blood circulate, to digest our foods, and so on and so forth. So now just transferring your weight from one side to another. And see if you can just imagine doing this in water. We've done it quite a lot, forwards and backwards. I'm going to go for a slightly wider stance so you can see what I'm doing. So you imagine the water pushing against that empty side of your body, and you move across there. And notice the difference between left and right. So go back the other way. When the image starts to work for you, can you detect a change in the sort of quality, or if you prefer, the density between one side and another? And if you can feel that, can you go a stage further and use that awareness to sort of imagine the movement? So that rather than being generated from outside, that internal movement generates the external movement. It's like, for instance, if I have this bottle of water in, if I tilt the bottle upside down, just making sure the top's on, the water drops down to the bottom each time. if I could somehow squeeze the water up to the top, I'd have to take the top off to do that. If it became top heavy, it would go down under its own power. So we begin to recognise that there is a slight change in how we move as we get more experience with these arts, which is that to start off with, if you like, the external movement, in this case the foot pushing down, helps you to get a sense for the internal movement, that sense of almost water flowing from one side of your body to another. But gradually that turns itself around, that it's that internal feeling, that internal movement that initiates the more external movement, which isn't to undervalue what's happening in the legs and so on and so forth. It's just a simple turnaround and brings your awareness more closely involved with now, from here, just on one side of your body, as you go across, so I'm going into my left, I let the hip describe a circle. I'm exaggerating here, probably my body's going out, but you can see there, like I've got a little pencil there and drawing the circle. And we want that to be felt up into the shoulder. So the shoulder also describes the circles, pushed up by your hip, carried over by your hip, dropped by your hip. And then your hand coming up and palm down as you drop down. Imagine there's a ball next to you and you're in water. You put your hand on the top of the ball and you drop down to push the ball down. Try that going into the other side. So now I'm moving across into this near side, describing the circle. Letting the shoulder follow. And then the hand. So these are the two halves of the exercise, bear play, that I've done with most of you at some point or another. So this time as you go over it into your left foot, do the same thing. So you're now alternating from side to side. Again, notice what's happening in your back, spine, that kind of slightly rolling gait. Very supple, very flexible. So a good exercise if you are feeling a bit tight in your back. Again, that stronger quality that you might associate with the image of the bear for a start, just beginning to make itself felt. But do this one more time, coming over into your left leg and turn to your left. So you draw your hand back with the leg really sort of loading with the weight. Now going into hitting the ball in front of the shoulder. Settle into the right leg and again. So there's an interesting contrast between the two movements in as much as it's quite a strong downward, very grounded quality with bear play. Of course, your arm is rising up significantly when we go into hitting the ball. One more time. And then cow gazes at the moon. Remember, this is a much stronger movement. So always begin with a swing up towards like the front corners. Not going any further. Do a couple like that, just to get a measure for how this is working in your back and your sides. And then again, very carefully, if you do want to go further, that's when you begin to sink down more and so on. But always very careful with your back, your spine. It's quite a tricky movement in many ways. It's a good movement. One more time on each side. And the last two exercises probably would have splayed your feet out a little bit. So now holding the ball, try and straighten up your feet a little bit if you can. Trying to keep your weight 50% in each leg. Remember, hips dropping back, knees soft. Go back the other way. So looking for this feeling of sitting on the top of the fence. See how my hips have dropped back there. Not this. This. Good. And so let's go back to Wild Goose for a few minutes. In this one, as in most of the exercises that we do, our hands are slightly in front of the body. As I've said before, there are one or two exceptions. Slightly in front of the shoulders is perhaps a better way of describing. So I don't want to do that at any point. So you know, if I'm doing something like Part in the Clouds, it's there, not there. In quite a lot of the movements there, it does look as though the hands are going behind the body. When I do pushing in four directions, well, isn't my hand going behind my body? But in fact, it's not. From the side, it's, you know, my hand is still in front of my shoulder. The movement is all in the turning from the hips. As I said, there are a few exceptions to that, but what we're going to do now isn't one of them. I push up and I turn. So, and then back to the turn the other way. So this and the next exercise we're about to do should actually really help us to focus our attention into the center part of the body, because the next one in particular is very easy to get a bit kind of confused about what you're supposed to do. What you're supposed to do is to focus on the center of your body. Sounds very simple, isn't it? Very simple, it's just not particularly easy. So a kind of refocusing of your attention to a more centered approach. Feeling that connection between your hips and your shoulders. And then just with one hand, so just with your right hand, turn to your right, let your hand come up as before, but now let your elbow drop and turn towards the front and push forward, as though you're throwing a ball ahead. So your hand's going to trace out a semicircle. What actually happens is that the swinging movement just naturally brings your hand up. As your hand drops, your elbow drops. So as your hand rises, your elbow drops down. That's just sort of kind of as though your elbow suddenly got very heavy. So quite naturally, that brings your hand into the shoulder. Try on the other side. And then alternating from side to side, just turn a little bit further, let the right hand come up, and then turn to the front. And a push-pull movement. Here there'll be a slight rotation in your arms. Just keep it very straight and simple, especially at the beginning. So here, one hand is pulling, the other one's pushing. What you can do after a while when you get used to this is here, get my hands pointing slightly forward. So here, palms of the hands face each other. What that means is, here, you get that slight dip down. You see, only very slight. It's just a moment where both hands are facing inwards. But in the end, the push is through the palm of your hand. One more time. Quite often when we're doing a movement like that, the first 2 or 3 times we do it, we think, oh, okay, yeah, kind of got that. And then you keep going and you end up doing it for a few minutes. And by the end of it, what's going on? And it's because at the start of doing something like that, we're having, oh, right, it's there, this is happening, we're trying to get all the details. So your mind is fully engaged with the movement. As you get more kind of, oh yeah, I kind of know this one, they think, oh, what's going on? And it's because your mind's drifted too far away from the movement. So both of those last movements encourage a kind of anchoring of our attention in this middle part of the body, the lower dantian. That's the area, I think it was the area between the hips and the waist. Though, as I've said before, there are other sort of definitions of the other locations, slight differences in that, but don't worry about that. It's the center of your body. So learning always to fix your attention there, if it's not fixed. Now, I don't mean the whole of your attention, but just the boat that's anchored to the seabed. There's more than just the anchor and the chain there, but it's always brought back. So if your attention does drift away, there's a sort of natural tendency to come back. You can use the movement, you can use your breathing, just use the rhythm. Yang is extending out, yin is drawing in. Try not to get terribly frustrated with that change in the focus of your attention. I won't say the loss of attention, but it's very natural for us. Again, where mammals, where animals are constantly monitoring their environment. Is there danger? Is there food? Is the weather okay? Do I need to do this? And so on and so forth. So our minds are kind of meant to wander, to engage outwardly, but they can go too far with that. So again, we want to find a kind of balance between those two. And that's important because we can feel as though we somehow failed. Oh, I'll never be any good at this. And so often I've heard people say, oh, I can't do Tai Chi, I can't concentrate. Well, no, we're not asking ourselves to concentrate in that way, just to gradually build this focus. So now, have one foot forward and transfer your weight. So we can do this movement with the center of the body just facing forwards, or at that comfortable angle that I've talked about before. We can also allow the body to turn in towards the foot. And that's the sort of natural way of doing it, unless there's any tension there, any stiffness, which is quite common. But we tend to face the direction that our toes are pointing. Or we can turn the other way, which requires a bit more positive, definite choice. So we go back and we turn towards the front foot, for instance. It's not too far. It tends to be a little bit tighter that side. And so if I go too far, I'll just put myself over. And when we do it this way, see if you can notice feeling between your hip and your foot. Roughly speaking, when we do something like that, the degree of turn, the range of the turn, is determined by the angle of the feet. Not rigidly so, never rigidly, but generally speaking, if I turn here, yeah, my hips and my shoulders are facing the direction of my back foot. If I start to turn any more that way, I'm more likely to sort of cross over that line. Going back, what I don't want to do, I'll come a bit closer so you can see my knee. What I don't want to do is to turn to the degree where I'm twisting my knee up or anywhere else in the body. And now on the other side. In the end, you're going to be very reliant on the feeling that you get from your body when you're simply standing, and you've got that just that feeling of equilibrium. We did that a little bit at the start of the session. Because it's those feelings that you want to maintain. And so, again, gradually our range of movement can increase when we're doing these exercises. As we get to understand the mechanism a little bit better and as our body conditions. And then turn towards the foot. And then away from. Remember, if you get to a point and everything's tightening up, you see my shoulders are back slightly, it's quite a tight turn. If I can release in the hips, see what happens. I can settle down more and I get more space that way. More movement. Pigeon spreads its wings, fisherman cast a net, pushing a wave, are all done forwards. Always remember what I've said before, though, about not getting fanatical about this. You want to aim to get to this point so that you're facing the front there. But if that's causing a tightening and stiffening, being slightly out is fine. But generally speaking, we're looking forward. So let's do those three, starting with pigeon spreads its wings. And then fisherman cast a net. And pushing a wave. Change over. Pigeon spreads its wings. And then fisherman cast the net. And pushing away. Good. And good. Relaxation. Let's go back to just the basic exercise for a moment. And this time I'm going to introduce some stepping. As always, be careful with this, and as always, it's quite interesting to try these things out with a little bit of support. That can sometimes give you a bit more freedom to play around with ideas and that, because normally when we do this, you think your weight back and you just let the hip drop, let the toes come up, and then you go forwards, you let your knee bend, the heel come up. But you may also find that your body quite naturally tries to turn either one way or the other when we do this. And if that's the case, then just allow it to. So again, we feel that sense of connection between different parts of the body, between the center and different parts of the body. This time going down into the feet. And in fact, if we're turning, then that can help us to bring the foot in as well. There's a saying in Tai Chi that the movement is rooted in the feet, released in the legs, controlled in the center of the body, and expressed in the arms. Thinking it's quite a useful sort of catchphrase, but I think in many ways it's more useful to think of that last stage, or the last two stages, controlled from the center, but expressed in the periphery of the body. It's not just the arms that are connected to the center of the body, it's the whole of what we might think of as the periphery, from toes to the crown of your head. And remember, we plant the foot. When you go forwards, the heel goes down, then the toes, and you push in just a little bit to feel the connection, then you move your weight. And then on the other side, the idea of doing it in this way to raise toes and heels is so that gradually you get used to more of your weight being supported in the full leg. Or rather, more accurately, more of your weight flowing down through that. And stepping in. And then take a couple of steps forwards if you've got room. and then carefully back. Check. Okay, so we've got the step in, and if you're interested in that, by the way, there's more detail. There's a film dedicated to the step in up on the YouTube channel. But we combined that. Earlier we did this exercise, so that leads us into Wind Blows the Willows, and then Dragonfly Skims the Water. Again, there's more detailed film up there. So we'll go through the different stages of this. Just take it nice and easy and gently. Don't feel that you have to sort of do the whole sort of sequence of movements. Feel comfortable in the movement and be aware this is quite a tricky movement. So there's no reason why you shouldn't be able to do it, but it is one of the more kind of advanced movements in inverted commas. So it might well be that you get stuck at a particular point, which is fine. That's all part of the course. I'll do it with my back to you. So here, we're going to use that turn and descend to go into your back foot. Have your left foot forward, sorry, and turn. This is Wind Blows the Willows. So the combination of your weight transferring, the center of your body turning, and that yin-yang rhythm, that expansion and contraction in your body. Moving your arms forward. You really don't want to tighten up in the shoulders or your back. So again, taking this to whatever point is comfortable for you. See, you can also sort of raise your toes and your heel in the way that we were just doing. And then again, if it's comfortable, you step in, taking the time to step out properly. So the center of your body turns, the center of your body drops into the ground. As Wind Blows the Willows, slight transition into what we could think of as the beginning of Dragonfly Skims the Water as well. But let's do that on the other side. Have your right foot forward, sink back, turn into your left. And then toes and heel. Try not to lean to do this. Remember the connection between the center of your body, your feet, hips dropping down, that little turning movement, all helping to bring your heel and your toes off the floor, and eventually helping with the step in. So that leaves your upper body free to continue with the movement in your arms, the turning, the expansion, the contraction, and the maintenance of that sense of equilibrium. Quite short steps we're taking. We don't need to strain in our shoulders to take a long stride. And then you're ready for this. It's time, get to here, bring the foot in, step forwards. This is dragonfly skims the water. Do as many as you've got room for. Step back, turning towards the front leg. And then going forwards again, just a couple of times. And the combination of taking the step, of turning, of your arms extending, is quite a difficult one. So for instance, we know that if you look at some of the National Health figures about when people are most likely to fall, one of the times, which is a kind of danger time, like one of the triggers for falling, could be turning. If you turn too quickly, so it's like you're standing doing the washing up, the phone rings, and I'm sure we all had this sort of experience to a greater or less extent. You turn around and just, oops, kind of stumble slightly because your body's thrown offline, and so on and so forth. So again, don't underestimate the difficulty of that exercise that we've just done. And above all, don't get discouraged if you're like, oh, what's going on? I'm not too sure. That's how it starts. It took me several years to really come to grips with that exercise. If you feel you can do it, then get outside and do it on a slightly rougher surface, because that's also quite interesting. Feeling how the center of the body helps us with that. As I said, there is a film on the YouTube channel for those two exercises as well. So if you want more detail, have a look. So rub your hands together, and then tapping over your face. Over your head and neck. And down to one shoulder. And your the other side. And your back. Around your hips. Good. And then your legs. Light on your belly. On the upper part of the chest. Good. Now, let your hands drop down. And embrace tiger. Return to mount. Again, using your legs, making sure that your arms stay slightly in front of your body. One more time. and stand. Lovely. That's great. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you for coming and look after yourself. The sun started shining here, so that's quite nice. Hopefully it is where you are as well.
Thank you. Thank you, Mike.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Mike.
And
Bye.
Thank you, Mike.
Bye, Diana.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
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 Thank you, Mike. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.